Hello and welcome to the Undercut podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jesse Billington, and joining me to review all the action from Monaco in the feeder series is Thiemo Albus Daly. How are you?
I'm pretty darn good, thank you, Jesse Billington. How are yourself?
I'm not doing too badly. A little bit sunburnt, a little bit sort of tired. I've had a busy weekend at Brands Hatch watching the Masters Racing Series. I was about to say feeder series. That's what we're about to talk about. Masters Racing at Brands Hatch. Classic cars going around, some classic F1 cars going around as well. If you love screaming DFV V8s, that's the place to be. Fantastic.
And you can check all of that out on our Instagram page.
There'll be
lovely photos.
Some photos coming up there. I've got some that I need to develop in the background. But yeah, trying to talk over those has meant that my voice sounds quite gravelly at the moment. So for those of you that are going, oh, he sounds husky, there's your reason why. Yeah. Anyway, we'll jump straight into something a little more relevant than my rather alluring sounding voice and move on to what the hell has happened. And the crucial things to note from this really was qualifying wise. We had Vesti on pole for Formula 2 and Gabriele Mini on pole for Formula 3. Some decent pole performances there.
Especially when the only other thing worth mentioning about, which I didn't put in the notes, is just that there was a lot of crashing through both categories in qualifying. It seems they got all of that out of the way early doors, but there wasn't too much in the way of incidents across the rest of the weekend, aside from a couple of obvious ones that we'll get to. But yes, solid pole from Vesti. He's kind of just, again, one of these drivers that has been flying under the radar a little bit and just coming out every now and again and being absolutely just flash in the pan, but then he's just still working away nice behind the scenes. And Mini, even impressive all season, so it's not too much of a surprise there. And again, just nice to see.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a lot of crashy action early on from the two feeder series, but yeah, the sprints and the features were nowhere near as hectic as we anticipated them being, especially with Formula 3, given the amount of cars we're anticipating on track. I know the Sky feed had friend of the podcast, Harry Benjamin, doing some commentary, I think, for it. And we also had Alice Powell as well. Absolutely brilliant contribution to the commentary across the weekend in the feeder series. Got to say, round of applause to Alice for that, because
she did the F2 commentary as well with Alex Jakes. So it's nice to see, because I wasn't sure if we're going to get Alex and Alex again for F2. But if you can't have both of them there, then why not have an Alex and an Alice?
Yeah, but she was great for alliteration, but also great for just simply the sort of scope that she can bring to it. This is a girl who's done a bit of feeder series racing. We saw in W series. She's raced in single seaters before. She knows how the weekends
work. Racing Alex Bundle in
Preva single series and seater series as well. So very interesting from that side. But she's able to bring this great sort of commentary to be able to inform you as to what's going on, but also this insight as to what it means to be a driver, to be a team down on the circuit working away. So very much a valuable person to have in the commentary box, and a welcome one. Please come back, Alice Powell. If you listen to us on this podcast, whatever reason, I'm sorry. But also, we love your work in the commentary box, and we'd be more than happy to have you back in our ears.
Excellent time for it.
Yeah.
We'll launch into the Formula 2, though, going off of that. And the sprint race, first of all, I'm going to run through it, just the highlights, essentially. And in chronological order, Novalak tapped Kushmaini coming out of the tunnel and spun him around for the early doors, causing a slow motion crash of pretty much hilarious proportion as four cars, which were Nissany, Bosch, Leclerc, and Stanek, crashed/didn't crash, but crashed. And it was only the type of crash you could have at Monaco, really. And only a couple of them retired. A couple of them then limped on a bit longer, and it was kind of just very odd to see what damage they did sustain/didn't sustain, but then could carry on a little bit, and then it was all just very odd. But Novalak got a 10-second penalty for the collision, and then got a 5-second penalty on top of that for speeding in the pit lane. He's not had a good season, and it's, some would say, karma for other things, but who knows? There was then a race restart with Hadjar leading, and then his car immediately died on him in what was just, I had to laugh a little bit because it was just such rotten bad luck. Like, oh, of course. It just had to happen at that point.
This was the Mechachrome moment of the weekend, really. Well, no, actually, it wasn't Mechachrome moment of the weekend because it also impacted Fittipaldi, didn't it?
I think so, yeah. It was
Fittipaldi retired with an engine failure as well, which again,
yes,
you don't see too much happening in many other sort of the single seaters. It doesn't really happen in F3, but the Mechachrome V6s in these F2 cars are useless engines. They really are.
No, it wasn't great. It wasn't also great for Cordial, when is it? When he crashed out at Mirabeau on lap 22, and then Behrman went out a few laps later because his front right was completely bent in, and was just not a good weekend for him, especially after having such a solid weekend in Baku last time out. Iwasa then won the sprint race by 7 seconds from Deruvela in P2. Somehow he's woken up again and has decided to do good. I don't know how long that will last for, though. And then Jack Crawford in P3, who it's just nice to see up there. We kind of again, he's been a little bit further down the order than we would have maybe expected him to be. But at the same time, it's nice that, again, keep remembering it's Monaco. It's challenging in its own respect in a lot of ways. So if you can really hook up qualifying and get to the sprint race, it shows that you got reversed, but you had to be in a decent position anyway, out of all 22 cars, to be in a position to get reversed up to a decent position and then make a little bit of progress. Not bad at all. And you're on the podium in Monaco. You're not going to complain or look at that too much.
I mean, yeah, to get a good lap time around Monaco in fairly tricky to handle feeder series cars is by no means a laughing matter. So yeah, it's a decent thing. I think the interesting one for me from a lot of this was Doohan. He really came strong at the tail end of last year's season. I think it sort of gave us almost a false hope for his ability to get something like this car. Did he move teams as well between seasons? I can't remember.
I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but it did remind me that over on Inside F2, friends of our podcast, and we were all predicting championship winners for the year, and about 90% of us said Jack Doohan because of how strong he was looking off the tail end of last year. And he's kind of taken that very personally and decided to ruin all of our hopes for it. And it just, I mean, the bad luck continued in Monaco, as we'll get to in a minute in the feature race, but it just, we've no idea what's happened there, really. And still not entirely sure who is going to win this year. We're definitely not having a Drogovic year of, oh, this boy's going to go and do it, and there's not much anyone can do about it. We've got a good few different contenders up there, but weirdly, Jack Doohan currently isn't one of them. We do still have 16 races left over 8 rounds, but that's going to have to be a Herculean effort along with a lot of bad luck for some of the other drivers, which it's F2. It's possible, but it's not a good time for him.
Yeah, just not what you'd expected from a driver that looked so strong coming through the field last year and sort of came out of nowhere for a bit. Then all of a sudden, all the discussion was Jack doing this, Jack doing that. And now it's Jack doing some spinning and not driving very good.
Feature race-wise, though, my first note is just Cordial out. Can't remember what happened to him. He was just out pretty early doors. Leclerc then lost his brakes and the curse continued for him as he retired. And it just seems that it doesn't matter which member of the Leclerc family you are, Monaco is not the place for you. Fittipaldi's engine, as you alluded to, Jesse, then blew up coming out of the tunnel and he promptly retired. That's why I wasn't thinking about it for the sprint race. It didn't happen there. It happened in the feature race.
I wouldn't say it happened in the sprint race. It just happened. It's that thing of the Mechachrome engines. They've been lauded for a while of being a bit of a boat anchor, and the fact that it's such you can rely on them failing to a point that there is a meme that regularly circulates around F1 Twitter when it happens of you just got Mechachromed. Come on. Obviously, they were no good in F1 either when we had the Mechachrome engines in. No. Was it the Williams, I think?
Probably. Knowing their luck.
Yeah, it was. Again, why do we keep going back to them? Anyway, I'll leave you to continue.
Doohan crashed out properish coming out of the hill on lap 22, and it was, again, just a very bizarre crash. There wasn't an obvious reason for it. He just crashed. I mean, we saw a lot of the replays because the race then got red flag because of debris of fluid being across the track, and it's Monaco, and you can't just clean up. You can clean up quickly, but you need to kind of stop racing from happening to do that. It's a very odd crash, but then resulted in everyone kind of going in the pits initially before it did get red flagged to try and take the most of the opportunity of what was at that point yellows. Porsche got double stacked with Martins and got dropped from the tracks mid-stop, which is just going to hurt a little bit as the driver in the cockpit. And then he got investigated for that by the stewards because the team hadn't followed the proper procedure for a pit stop, which is just a bit of an insult to injury there.
I don't know if the proper procedure is simply just get some guys and pick the car back up. I assume there's a proper way of doing it, but as opposed to just going...
Heat stuff is a bit odd.
Yeah, but Yeah, do we want to talk? I suppose the next thing to really talk about this is Cordeal comes back out many laps down
Yes.
after they use the sort of red flag period to fix what went wrong and go, oh, I'm back out. At least you might as well get some distance under you, get used to the car and go on from there. 18 laps down, though,
18 laps
so
down.
which is very F2 in its own little weird
What
way.
was even more impressive, though, about that was, and I was talking to Inside of 234 about this as this was happening, like 18 laps down, it's not impossible. He could still win this. It's doable. And then it kind of did look less impossible because he was suddenly 7 laps down as opposed to 18. And come the end of the race, he was only on the graphics 1 lap down on the rest of the field, which either he was doing some supersonic performances in his car and was unlapping himself 17 times in what was then a timed race, and there were about 7 minutes on the clock left. In which case, when the footage comes out, I cannot wait to see it, and it will eclipse anything from Hungary last year.
I think
and
at that point, he
like
technically becomes a particle accelerator.
Yeah, you kind of, I don't know what kind of, he's got Mario Kart kind of tools available to him at that point to help him get past everyone. But then Victor Martin's got a drive-through penalty when he was up in P2 because he didn't slow down the yellow flags. I don't know if you've seen the replay of this.
I have seen the replay of this. It is shocking.
Was very, very dangerous, and I kind of just a little bit shocked by it. But it was just
this was
that could have been a lot worse than. I mean, nothing happened, but it could have been so very, very bad.
I think we're lucky nothing happened there. This was could have been a Herculean crash and would have likely been fatal.
Which was already a Herculean crash in some ways because of Doohan's engine deciding kaboom is the aim of the day.
Kaboom? Yes, Rico, kaboom. But we'll wind the clock back to the start of Doohan's crash, which, if anything, starts back at the exit of La Piscine, where he sort of taps the wall and breaks his right rear suspension. But it's not a significant break. It's probably like a light fracture that's not hobbled the car in any notable way, right until it's sort of really loaded through Saint-Devote and then on the hit climb up towards Nissany, where all of a sudden it just fails as he turns in for the left. Obviously, weight transfer across the car, snaps the suspension, and he just gets jettisoned sort of sideways and backwards into the wall with such force that it embeds his rain light in the Armco, breaks the Armco, it's dented the Armco to the point that had to be replaced. And he sort of hops out of the car, mercifully uninjured. Engine go kaboom, worrying. Again, Mechachrome, not ultimately surprising. So obviously marshals are now out on track with fire extinguishers. The track is sort of, we've run off running down the hill, being soaked in extinguishing liquid, engine sort of contaminants, fuels, oils, coolant. And out of nowhere, for some reason, under clear double-waved yellows, you have Victor Martins come barreling towards them around a section that's sort of semi-blind, and then luckily manages to make evading action and sort of swing around the rear of the mess. But that could have been an awful sort of, it almost feels bad to say a Tom Price accident, but that's the nearest thing you can draw a parallel to is marshals on track with fire extinguishers and a car hurtling towards them at high speed. That was a horrendous accident when it happened in period, and it would have been absolutely awful if we'd seen a sort of replay of that in Monaco this weekend. So I think when we first saw that Martin's been handed a drive-through penalty for not slowing down under yellows, everyone goes, oh, it seems like they've not so much thrown the book at him, but beat him to a pulp with it. But then we see his onboard.
And then you see it and you're like, oh,
and the reason
fair enough, actually.
And I think there's a very good reason they held back on showing us the replay for a good while. And then went, no, you don't get away with a slap on the wrist for that behaviour on track. You need to learn your lesson. And yeah, you're running in P2. We're going to total your race for that. And again, it's one of those things that I don't feel that the possible outcomes of a sort of rules infraction should dictate the penalty. But I hope that this has made Martins go, no, that was unacceptable. Hopefully someone has sat him down, shown him back that footage and gone, you're done screwed up there, fella. I think there's a valuable lesson to be learned.
Talking to people who keep screwing up, though, Novalak was given a 5-second penalty for unfortunately being a muppet, which is essentially erratic driving against Nissany of all people coming out of the tunnel. And they just seem to be tussling a lot. And of all the drivers to be fighting with, why do you choose Roy Nissany?
Yeah, that's
because that's not going to probably go well.
You just wait 3 turns for him to make a mistake and drive past him, surely.
You just wait for him to take himself out of the equation as per usual. I mean, you pick a race. And Novalak just with an awful weekend all round, and you just kind of wonder, you got here somehow. Where's your talent gone? Or has it run out a bit and maybe you shouldn't have been promoted? Or I don't know. It seems odd. We've got 22 cars up there. It's kind of the future F1 stars of tomorrow is how it's billed all the time. And then you look at some of the drivers on the grid and you think, I mean, really though?
I've never looked into Novalak's F3 sort of campaigns. That might be something worth doing at a later point in time, because I'm quite tired and we don't want this to overrun too much with my furious Googling. But yeah, he's not a driver that's impressing. He didn't impress hugely last year.
The thing on that one is the fact that Kushmini was someone we crapped on a lot at the beginning of the season because of his F3 record, and he's done extremely well. Monaco this weekend, not his best friend, but we were kind of maybe expecting that at best for him this year. So F3 is a little weird on how they take punts on certain drivers, but again, in terms of risks turning out, Novalak's not really. I mean, last year he was against Drogovic, okay, fine, but was nowhere near him on any stretch of the imagination. And this year, just kind of the team switch hasn't worked, and he's fighting Nissany and getting penalties for it because he can't even fight Nissany properly. Which, if anyone's getting a penalty in that fighting scenario, it should be Nissany, just based off history. So very odd there. But out in front, it was Frederick Vesti in P1, pole to flag, excellent job there. Poor chair P2, Maloney, boy from Barbados, P3. You'll appreciate this as well. Alex Jakes on the commentary when they were talking about Maloney said it's absolutely mandatory now. We've got to refer to him as the boy from Barbados.
I want to know where that stems from, because I doubt that was like an us thing that's become wider.
I kind of would be fun if it was, because I can't remember anyone saying this before us and Jacob, to be honest.
Yeah, I will say though that our feeder series stuff, if you're listening to our feeder series stuff, hello, welcome, thank you, sometimes does a lot better than our F1 stuff. There is a
there's a bit chance
that for some reason
people in Barbados listen to it as well.
We do.
In the caption. So
if you're from Barbados, comment below. There's probably a chance if you're listening on Spotify to drop us a comment as well. Say hello, welcome again. How's the weather? I assume possibly better than where we are in the UK and Ireland. Well done to your driver. He's not doing too badly.
No, not at all.
He's in our Barbudan hands.
Does wrap that up quite nicely, that one, and we can move on to F3 then, which relatively tame overall, which is quite surprising, as we mentioned at the top of this. The sprint race in particular had some one-lap drama, taking 2 MP Motorsport cars out of the equation early doors, but apart from that, there wasn't much else to talk about. Tommy Smith was put through the ringer at several points, akin to Button Verline a few years ago, just before the tunnel. He's kind of very nearly got flipped, essentially, but was able to just kind of sort that out and managed to finish the race. But it was pretty tame affair overall. Like I say, Pepe Marti in P1, Leonardo Fornaroli in P2, 8 seconds behind, and then Gregoire Saucy in P3. So it's a pretty standard affair. And the feature race was better in terms of quality, but again, there wasn't an awful lot going on there. Ido Cohen crashed into the water before the swimming pool, which was a bit of a hard shunt. But again, Monaco F3, we would be surprised if that didn't happen at some point. Bernard got a 10-second penalty for cutting T1 and getting 2 positions. Interestingly, that happened on the very first lap, and the stewards, were very harsh and strict on what was allowed and what wasn't there. Hugh Barter did the same thing, but he only got a 5-second penalty because he only gained 1 position as a result of that. But it's interesting to see that worked out and being able to see why it was only 5 seconds for him and 10 seconds for Bernard. So that was interesting. I like that. Collis and Montoya battle left the former out with a puncture, which was unfortunate because that was a nice little scrap going on there. And Montoya's race was ruined because of a new front wing being needed as they made contact coming up the hill. The latter got a 10-second penalty for that one for causing the collision, which awkward, but again, that's racing sometimes. And you had poleman Gabriel Mini in P1 with Ganovic. He was pushing towards him but couldn't quite get anywhere near Mini to challenge for that really in P2. And then poor Aaron in P3. And the one last thing I want to say about Formula 3 as a whole over the weekend is that all of the stewards this weekend, I don't know if you know this, it was the first time they were all women.
Oh, well, that's an interesting little fact, and one that ties in neatly with whichever podcast you mentioned. It's the Spain preview, which you'll listen to next, where we mentioned about the sort of prevalence of women coming through in other elements of motor racing, especially in IndyCar. We noticed it. That's great to see. Great to know. I will say F3 didn't feel very F3 this weekend. It felt a bit like F2.5, just
was odd.
A bit more mature, a bit tidier than it usually is. Which I don't know if I'm impressed
like
by
that.
or annoyed by that.
No, I'm annoyed by it. We want it for the craziness, which doesn't mean crashing necessarily. It just means mad racing and attempts to overtake some places. And with the smaller cars, we've seen in Formula E, overtaking is very, very possible. So F3, do better next year if you come back here.
Yeah, do better. Give us more crashes and stuff, I guess. I don't know. We like F3 for...
just the closer racing. Just at least, doesn't need to be the crashes, but there's more overtaking there generally, more kind of overtaking places where you wouldn't expect it to be. They find it on any track, and they just got to get the memo.
Equally, this was F3's first time in Monaco, wasn't it?
In the
current iteration,
era, they were there for GB3 way back when, but it's been quite a bit of time since then.
Yeah, so for many of these drivers, this is going to be the first, well, for all of these drivers by and large, this is going to be the first time they've ever raced around Monaco. It's going to be quite daunting. So you can understand if some of them are entering this with a little bit more trepidation than potentially other race.
Meanwhile, that does take us neatly into one other thing we want to talk about for Formula 3, which is obviously, of course, Florsh watch. She qualified in P27 at Sofia. It was a shame because she had some really strong practice session times, considering where kind of the area she normally is. She's kind of P18, P19 area, which is kind of like, okay, we're going to be Monaco again. If we're going to assume that you kind of finish where you start, then that would have been quite encouraging. So it was a shame to see her all the way down there. Sprint race finished P23, although as you've kindly pointed out, 2 drivers ahead of her did retire, plus Hunter Gainey was running 3 laps down with problems. That's going well for him, by the way. His career is going excellently. And so we're only looking at one genuine on-track position change here, which she said herself, there wasn't really much that we could do here. There was potential a little bit, but not much you could kind of do. And then the feature race, she started on the pit lane with her teammates because of a team operational infringement, which and finished P23 again, made it places, but a fastest lap some 2 seconds off the pace to pack ahead. Again, it's kind of, without the data in front of us, it's hard to know why these things happen all the time. We might want to look at that whenever the hell we get a breather from all of Motorsport at some point, go back and have a really deep dive into the reason behind some of these things. Wozniacki arguably had the better of her on this weekend in the same car, which is interesting because normally not the case. She is normally leading the 2 teammates. So interesting kind of inter-team battle going on there. More places getting the sprints, tighter qualifying, better feature. Not a bad weekend, not a good weekend, just kind of a weekend.
Yeah, usually it's quite interesting to this Florsh watch, especially because it's interesting to sort of very much the sort of weird being the sort of forerunner, almost ignore. I don't want to say forerunner of women coming into the modern era of single seaters. We did have
she could be the benchmark to do
it flop in Formula 2 last year as well. We had
Tatiana
Calderon, but
she's the next one to kind of carry that torch forward and try, because as good as F1 Academy is with all of its stuff, and it does have its problems as well, Sophia is there in F3 going, hey guys,
it can be done.
Let me have a go at this.
It takes a long old time with a lot of other series in the middle between it to secure enough sponsorship. Again, that's the big thing holding a lot of female drivers back, is securing sponsorship. But the crucial thing is it's great to celebrate her performances. They have to be taken in context against the rest of the playing field. You can't give them this weird sort of hyper podium above everything else. You have to look at them in the grand scheme of things. And that's often one of the interesting things where people start to find that against the likes of Chadwick in some of the earlier seasons she ran in single seaters. I think GB4, she had a bit of a torrid season. Again, you've got to look at the season holistically. You can't just pick and choose the results where she wasn't winning or on the podium, but you've got to look at them against the rest of the field in which they compete, and certainly against teammates, which is why I wanted to bring up Wozniacki, who had a better weekend. But like you said, generally, Florsh has got the handle of what's not a brilliant PHM Charouz. So, yeah, swings and roundabouts.
It's still important for that self-confidence boost and proving that you're at least going in the right direction. It's also worth noting, because I know you love the statistic, Jesse, that out of all the drivers racing in Formula 1, Formula 2, Formula 3 and the Porsche Super Cup at Monaco this weekend, there was, I think, 100 drivers in total, only one female driver, Sophia Florsh. So she is up against quite a bit of competition there and trying to make herself stand out from the rest of the crowd and forge a pathway through all of that.
Yeah, I mean, when you add on the entire, what was it, 33 drivers from IndyCar, you're only adding in a further one female driver to
Yeah,
that. I'm trying to think about any other major series that ran across the weekend. There was no F1 Academy,
no
um,
Formula E, no
no
Extreme
Formula
E, no
E, no Extreme
AOS,
E.
no WEC.
You're sort of looking towards, was BTCC on over the weekend? Because I know you've got,
Yes, it was. You do have a few more there in Genettas and that kind of thing,
yeah,
but again, you're having to go a
we're
little bit
really sort of
left
diverging
field.
from the mainstream motor racing to try and find more female sort of drivers. So again, it's an achievement in of itself getting that seat, certainly as a female driver, where the odds are stacked against you. But once you're in, I think it's only fair that you have not necessarily criticism, but your metrics are judged against your teammates as you would be any other driver. I think that's the thing you've got to argue is, and this was something that I know the rally driver Michelle Mouton wanted most was not to be judged as a woman, but to be judged against her peers in the field, where she was essentially was sort of a few points shy of being a world rally champion. That there is no arguing that, and there were drivers that genuinely feared her on track because they knew they could not get close to her. And I think that's the thing is when you start looking at people against the rest of the field, that's where you get a real handle on what makes a racing driver. And that's the crucial way of framing it. It's not what makes a female racing driver, it's what makes a racing driver.
I think the last thing I'll say on that one before we move on is that, as well, like you say, this PHM car isn't the best one on the grid either. So it's
we're trying to get a handle on a decent driver, but in a bad
being
car.
A racing driver, but we don't want the same thing to happen to that happened to Tatiana last year. Essentially, is that you're given a shit car, and then she's not done great. So why should we push her up in a different team? It's like, well, if you had that with a bloke, you wouldn't be saying it because you literally, it's happened all the time where a driver in a crap car down the bottom grid suddenly is in a Prema or in a Carlin, you know. So just
Daniel
I'd like to see
into F1 in a Hispania HRT. And working his way up and ending up at Red Bull.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's
if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But you'd at least like to see a chance for it. And arguably, with a lot of the drivers in F3 in particular, you're better off taking a punt on someone like Florsh, who you know there's definitely potential there. There's a good racing driver over another driver where you know that probably. I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to get the same result anyway. So why not take the chance? And potentially, you look like an absolute hero. And you're kind of forging a path for women motorsport. And even if it doesn't work, you tried, and that still looks good for you.
Yeah, there's definitely no harm in trying, and I really hope this doesn't come across like I'm sort of dumping on females trying to get into racing. I think it's established across the podcast that I'm very much for it. The question I will ask though is, do you think she would have been better off entering F1 Academy?
Well, she wouldn't have been able to. Oh, hang on, how old is she? I just think they've got an age limit, so I don't. That'll hint my answer immediately, depending.
Okay, the F1 Academy age limit is 25 years and younger. Sophia,
I think she's younger than me, which is probably means she's like 21 or 22 or something. So maybe
she's 22.
Okay, no, essentially. Then I still think no, because you still then have to. She'd be undoing a lot of what she's already done to get where she was. She was already in F3, bearing in mind, in 2020. So then it's kind of, we're already annoyed that the likes of Marta Garcia and Abby Pulling are in F1 Academy after having multiple seasons in W Series. And if they can't get into F3, then she owes it to them at the very least to stick it out and go into F3 and try and do it properly there. Because I don't know, we know she's good in a car. So there's no point proving that again by winning another championship in F1 Academy. Just go in F3 and do it that way. So I think even if it's trickier, she'll get more satisfaction out of that. And she very much is like Michelle Mouton that way. She doesn't want to be judged based on, she's pretty good for a female race driver. She just wants to be based on racing driver.
She's pretty good for a racing driver. And I think that's the crucial thing. I mean,
Alpine wouldn't have got her into the academy for no reason.
Yeah. And I think that she didn't have a great run when she was in F3 in 2020, wasn't it? That was last
No, she was with Campos then. But again, they were kind of the PHM of 2020. So it was this awkward thing again.
Yeah, wind the clock back a further season. She's in Freca. She's scoring points every race of that, which is pretty good going. Again, you're against a fairly mixed group of drivers there, but I think
Freca's pretty competitive.
Yeah, you had the likes of going up against Ollie Caldwell, David Schumacher, Fred Vesti, Enzo Fittipaldi.
I say you kind of lost me with the first one. They're not really that good, but Vesti and Fittipaldi, that's
Yeah, but also you've got Jake Hughes who's now over in Formula E. Again, you've got some decent names that just pop up in it. And if you're going toe to toe with them and getting points every weekend,
and again, also worth noting with a couple of these drivers, they're similar age, but Jake Hughes and one or two of the other ones, I can't remember who now, but they are a good few years older as well, so they're more experienced, and she's beating them at that point in a very competitive 28. Series.
So she was a lot younger than them in what was her one and only run in Freca. So she was a rookie coming into it that year, and yeah, she didn't do a sort of Fittipaldi or a Vesti and sort of podiums sort of in and out. But
consistency is key.
Yeah, consistency is key. And bear in mind that of all the drivers that ran in every weekend, she did not come as the lowest scorer in that. So you're looking at below that, you've still got Constance Lapalainen and Sharon Scolari coming in below that. She was doing really quite well. No disqualifications, no retirements, crucially as well. So we're not talking a driver that's sort of winning it or binning it. There's talent there. I think an ideal chassis and some ideal driver coaching would really sort of embellish that nicely. So drivers that stood out.
Drivers that stood out, which I'll give you a little bit of time to figure your one out. But for me, I've gone for Roman Stanek. He went from P22 to P7 in the feature race, and I thought it'd be a nice little left field choice there instead of going for the main three. And just quite impressive. I'm not quite sure how he got up there, but kudos.
Yeah, it was a decent little drive. I might go straight down the line and go for Vesti, really. A pretty tidy performance for him throughout the weekend. It's worth noting, worth sort of giving a nice little nod to. And again, being able to keep your cool under safety car restarts and rolling restarts through Monaco to really make that work. Yeah, credit where it's due, I think, is one of the things that's got to go there.
Formula 3, I've gone left field again slightly with Bortoletto, P6 in the sprint and P5 in the feature. Still leading the championship. Consistency is key. If he's not on the podium, he's still getting points in both races, which can be incredibly tricky, especially in Formula 3, because if you have bad qualifying, you kind of maybe save yourself with the sprint because of the reverse nature, but that's not always a guarantee. So it's good that he's being able to just collect points where necessary and kind of damage limitation.
I think for my Formula 3 driver, sort of with a bit of praise to heap on them, I'm going to go for Pepe Marti.
Fair enough.
Yeah, decent sprint race result. Pumping out some fairly quick times. I don't know if anyone really got close to him time-wise. There are a few drivers that really did, but given the fact that he spent a lot of time battling off advances from sort of Saucy Fornaroli behind him and was able to come home with an 8-second lead is pretty tidy, especially in races where drivers are often coming through in sort of big clumps. To be able to pull out an 8-second lead around Monaco in a fairly sort of tempestuous F3 car is pretty good going. So, yeah.
Not too shabby at all. No. Takes us on to our Driver and Constructors Championship top 3 for both series. So I will rattle through this quickly. F2 Drivers Championship. Vesti is the new championship leader with 89 points. Porcher in P2. Hotler Seals with 84. Iwasa P3, 69 points. Awkwardly enough, though, he was leading the championship for just about 24 hours, less than 24 hours even. After Saturday's sprint win, but that was quickly taken from him. In the Constructors' Championship, you've got Prema out front with 130 points, ART Grand Prix in second with 108, and Dams rounding out the top 3 with 103 points. Over in Formula 3, as mentioned before, you've got Bortoletto leading the way with 73 points, with still a sizable gap over Gabriel Mini in second place with 56 points, and then Gregoire Saucy in third with 47. Constructors-wise, it's Trident out in front this time with 124 points to their name. Prema Racing in second with 110 points, and High-Tech Pulse 8 with 102 points. All relatively nice and not too tight, but not too big a gap either for any of those championship standings in the top 3.
Yeah, nothing that means that it's all sort of set in stone at this point in time, and plenty of scope for things to really keep changing, especially the top end of this F2 championship. If you want to follow the Drivers' Championship that's going to be chopping and changing, F2 is the one to certainly look at or keep an eye on this year.
Well, that is all we've got time for on this week's episode. Join us again soon. We'll have some more excellent F1 content for you, probably from the Spanish rounds for Formula 2 and Formula 3. It's going to be another busy weekend, so do make sure you've liked, subscribed, and got notifications turned on not to miss anything. But in the meantime, Mr. Jesse Billington, where can the people find you?
I can be found all across the interwebs on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube as at Jesse on Cars. There should be some YouTube content returning to your screens, hopefully this week if I get a chance to do any editing, though doubtful. It's a busy one. But yeah, there'll be pictures from a weekend at Brands Hatch as well coming up. So plenty of F1 cars, classic GT touring and sports cars appearing there as well. And equally, you can find me in Classic Car Weekly, new issue out on Wednesday, which I think is when this episode drops, with a review of the Citroen 2CV in it, which I wrote and did. That's my work, that is.
You did the theme tune and everything, did a proper Dennis Waterman.
I did.
As for myself, you can find me over on Is It Fast, On the Curbs, the Nitro Race podcast, Paddock Sorority, and Instagram, where there is a sleuth of content across all of those this week. It's been a busy old time, but that is very much all we've got time for, as I said. So thank you very much for listening, and we will see you again very soon.